Welcome to the Tuesday, October 25th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Podcast. Man, I'm already excited. Too much coffee. It's Jake and Joe back as always every Tuesday here, getting you set for your waiver wire pickups. Obviously, big show, running backs that we discussed last week. It's a lot of victory lapping. So if you're excited for that, happy to discuss the Panthers backfield and Gus Edwards, who Jake and I both called. Stick around for the rest of the show. Of course, we're going to also talk a few other pickups too, right after the break here. Again, welcome to the Tuesday, October 25th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you and sponsored by No House Advantage. Joe Bartel, you can find me at JB Fantasy Sports alongside me, Jake Letarski at RotoJake. Today, we're here to run down the top waiver wire pickups and FAAB recommendations ahead of Week 8. We've made it through Buymageddon. Jake, I think it's fair to say, given all the guys that are on waiver wire, that it was Buymageddon last week. Now this weird 16.
And I want to say first, like right off the bat, it's very important to check to see who was dropped. Because you want to see, because there's some of the best offenses in the league were on bye last week, and people had to make some tough calls. So you definitely want to be scanning those last week's drops as part of it, because you might find a guy that is 76% rostered in Yahoo that we wouldn't even mention before. So absolutely worth checking out there. And honestly, with all the Mahomes and Juju and Kelsey I have, this week is way worse. So much worse for me than last week.
I was going to say, you are going to be the patron saint of the Week 8 Waiver Wire podcast here, because you are going to be the critical factor that we're trying to help with your fantasy teams. I
looked at the Stake League projected line, and I'm a 62-point dog if I use the same lineup as last week, because everybody
still
gone.
Beat my team. That's how bad it's looking right now. Well, let's get a word from our sponsors first. No House Advantage. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available. Play in pick'em contests versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb that leaderboard leaderboard too, for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to 5 player props, over-unders, or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, Jake's MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now for a promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at No House Advantage, or download the app on the App Store to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. You won't want to miss out on this. All right, we always try to do a Monday night recap, and I would have told you, Jake, that this was going to be a sleeper. Don't even tune in. The Patriots are going to dominate. And one team did dominate. The Patriots got dominated by the Bears. It was Justin Fields and the offense in a rain game again. I guess inclement weather just makes the Bears just a OP tier, but that was an impressive performance by Khalil Herbert, Justin Fields, who had a number of electric plays, and the defense absolutely dominated what looks to be now a QB controversy with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi or Wait.
Yeah, it was a very strange situation. Mac Jones started the game. He wasn't moving the ball. He threw a pick. The crowd was chanting for Zappi. This happened in New England. So New England got routed on their home field, basically. And so then, of course, Bailey Zappi comes in. Then they take the lead. They get close to taking the lead. Of course, that surrendered, and it then went very bad. So I remember running into the outline to write down, we have a quarterback controversy. But then by the end of the game, I'm like, not so fast, because Zappi finished, 14 for 22, which isn't bad, threw 2 picks, and just ended up looking not that great when it was all said and done, because I'm sure Belichick's pulling his hair out over the turnovers. So we'll see what happens here. This is a situation I don't really have any interest in jumping in from a fantasy perspective here. Zappi was maybe scooped up in 2 quarterback leagues. He was never more than 5-10% rostered in single quarterback redraft leagues. So I'm pretty much throwing my hands up and avoiding this situation, because who knows what we're going to see? At halftime, it was, okay, who's going to trade for Mac Jones this week? And by the end of the game, it was like, we don't actually know here. So I think we have our latest update on RotoWire. This is an hour ago. Mac Jones, Week 8 plans to be determined. That's pretty much exactly what you don't want to hear if you're trying to, do something from fantasy here.
I have him in my the Vegas Superflex League. I actually, of course, started him as opposed to Andy Dalton, who in that league went for 37 points. That was super fun. Thankfully, I wouldn't have won anyway if I had made the correct choice, but I thought Mac Jones is set up to be pretty successful, and I believe he's the better quarterback talent. Like, we watched Zappi against the Packers, and I know it him coming in relief in his very first game, some jitters. That didn't look like a real NFL quarterback. So I know with the time to scheme, Zappe has looked good against lesser opponents. And I guess given how bad the Packers have been, I don't know if we could say the Browns and Lions are lesser, but I still think they are worse teams than the Packers defense. And yeah, he's looked fine. I'm not convinced he's going to be Zappe, I should say, is anything better. But that being said, I was also incredibly low on Mac Jones, and everything we had last year that we saw on, so impressive rookie of the year winner, whatever. I thought you're like, what are you talking about? This guy's throwing for 200 yards, clearly just a game manager, and we're just getting overexcited about things that if you were not just excited about the new rookie toy, you would have been like, oh yeah, this is just Andy Dalton as a rookie. I think both QBs are not very good, and we're just going to keep going with back and forth on this, which is
exactly. And unfortunately, a lot of this had to do with the conditions, but it was low volume for all the pass catchers as well. Even the touchdown that Zappe threw to Jacoby Myers, he had Myers wide open, and it was a terrible throw that Myers had to turn around, catch, fall down, and get back up to score. And then, of course, I only needed 3 more fantasy points after that, and I couldn't get them, which was rough.
Sorry, that's tough.
Yeah. So when that happens in the first quarter, you're thinking, okay, he's going to catch 2 passes for 20 yards the rest of the game, and you're golden. But not the case. And another team was obviously particularly high volume. Devontae Parker was out there doing his thing. It was actually Ramondre Stevenson who led the Patriots in targets, and part of that is game flow, because I guess maybe he's more of the pass catcher, but he caught all 8 of his targets for 59 yards. He was also a much higher volume guy than Damian Harris on the ground. Now, this was Harris's first game back, so you have to take that into account. But I don't know. Stevenson seems to pass the eye test, or Steven's season, as people are writing that up.
Zappe season stuff.
Yeah.
No more season things until you're actually a really good player. I mean,
I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good about starting Ramondre week to week, though. He seems to be they're either up and they're running out the clock, and he gets involved as an equal amount as Harris, or they're behind, like this game, against the Bears. And he functions very well as a pass catcher. And, of course, he got the touchdown on the ground as well. So I'm very optimistic about him.
I would have said entering last week, there are 4 running backs that I will trade just about anything for. Breece Hall, RIP, Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, and Travis Etienne. I mean, it's a weird situation.
Ooh, that's tough to put Stevenson in that tier. But
I really felt confident, and I also didn't anticipate Harris would be back and effective, and I guess maybe with the conditions, whatever else. The offense is reliant on good runners, but just getting the running backs involved. And Stevenson really represents the only pass catcher. I was completely out on him entering the year, and I think you can still get a discounted price on him this week and in future weeks because you have Damian Harris around. But I think Stevenson's clearly the best back in both situations for an offense that needs it and utilizes it.
How about the backs on the Chicago side, though? I mean, Montgomery still seemed to have the volume edge. Of course, it hurts both Montgomery and Herbert when Justin Fields carries the ball 14 times, but he was incredibly effective here, actually looking like a somewhat viable quarterback. I mean, it's almost like they schemed the game to what he does well, and suddenly, who knew? Their offense is productive here, and he made some very impressive plays avoiding the pass rush and getting converting 3rd and long with his legs, which is very tough here. But I think Herbert's becoming a pretty reasonable start on the week-to-week basis. I mean, he had the 125-yard touchdown that made the fantasy day good, but he had 12 carries for 62, and Montgomery had 15 carries for 62, and he got a score on the ground as well. So both these guys might be fantasy viable if we can get this kind of game flow with any kind of consistency. Probably won't happen with the Bears, but who knows? You got to be optimistic after last night.
So we were talking trades just a bit ago with the running backs, and I almost wonder, now we can kind of be strategic. When we're in week 8, you more or less know what your team is and what they're going to be, middle of pack, whatever else. I would go and target the fantasy manager who has Herbert and try to act as if Herbert is a fill-in to a bigger player I'm getting, when in reality I value both the bigger player and Herbert in the same kind of asset tone as you'd expect.
Like, I'm playing 3D chess over here.
I just think Montgomery's been fine, but he hasn't been super effective. Herbert has been more explosive. Is that because it's the Justin Jackson role of last year at the Chargers? He only gets 7 carries, but run really hard and expend all the energy in those 7 carries. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, and do you really think
looks real?
Yeah. And do you think Montgomery's going to hold up physically for the entirety of the season? I mean, maybe that's why they're using Herbert a little bit more to try to conserve him a bit. But there will at least be 1 or 2 more Herbert games where we talk about him in the same sense as we're talking about Gus Edwards, Michael Carter, or stuff this week. So so there's a lot of names to get to.
All right, so bye weeks for week 8 only, if I'm reading this correctly, only Chiefs and Chargers, right? There's only 2 bye weeks after having 4 last week. Okay, obviously Jake's team with the Chiefs is hurting. Chargers overall, like as a literal franchise, are hurting. They have literally thousands of injuries at this point. Mike Williams, J.C. Jackson, their big free agent signing done for the season. Their offensive line is torn apart. I was in on the Chargers to begin the year. We talked about the over-unders. I thought that was going to be the team that did enough to exceed things. Looks like it's just going to be the Chiefs because the Raiders have been floundering. The Broncos at the moment, and the Chargers also decimated by injuries. Because there's only 2 bye weeks, generally, I think the streaming quarterback options you have, you don't have to pay as much. Like, this is a good thing for you, Jake. If you have Mahomes, you don't have to go all in to get these QBs.
And if you had Mahomes or if you had Herbert, you probably weren't rostering another quarterback unless somehow somebody really good slip so far in the draft. You probably weren't rostering another one. So I'm definitely going to have to run around and and stream some options here. Let's do streamers before 2 quarterbacks. I think the name that you'll see pretty much anytime you look at any publication's waiver wire, and I think it is the correct name, and that's Daniel Jones. He's 40% rostered. He goes to Seattle this week, number 22 against opposing quarterbacks. We were worried at one point about his weapons, but I'm not quite ready to call the Giants contenders, but Daniel Jones is hot, and he's playing well enough to be able to excel in this type of matchup here. And, you can even pair him up with a spoiler alert, Wan'Dale Robinson we'll probably talk about a little bit later. I think Daniel Jones is the best streaming option here. Now you look at the rest of the streaming options, Justin Fields, 34%. I think when he heads to Dallas, that's going to be a little bit tougher of a challenge. I think that defense is playing well. I'm not quite expecting a repeat from Fields, but he gets a mention. Mariota is home against the worst team in football, the Panthers. Theoretically. So maybe the Bucs are the worst team in football. Probably not, but my best bet under on Tampa Bay is starting to look pretty nice. And the other one, I see a lot of people wanting to stream the Colts defense, but Taylor Heineke, he started poorly in that Packer game. Obviously, we watched this very, very closely. He started very poorly, but then he got into a rhythm, and he was hot. And he was, the throw to McLaurin, that was the touchdown, was fantastic. He was, they're utilizing Antonio Gibson more. I don't know if that continues, but Heineke is an interesting option. I don't love him, on the road against the Colts. Defense hasn't necessarily been the problem for the Colts, but he's someone that you think of kind of almost, you think of him now like you would when you were pondering picking up Geno Smith in weeks 2 and 3, right? Like he's hot. Is he going to keep it up? And then maybe, he has the ability to turn into that. So, there are a few streamers out there that are definitely worth it, but I will be typing in Daniel Jones first when I'm trying to replace Mahomes and Herbert.
I think the over-under for that's going to be probably close to 50 points given the Seahawks' bad defense. And frankly, I think the Giants have been inconsistent, specifically against the run, which is the thing that the Seahawks want to do the most. I agree with you. I think Jones is a top streamer for me, but I'm not sure I think he's like that much better than Ryan Tannehill against the Texans. Or even I like Mariota against the Panthers. I think that one actually would be okay. You think about what the Falcons want to do. They completed just 8 passes last week. It's shocking that that's an offense in the NFL currently, but that's what we're looking at. I think Mariota has an opportunity to run a little bit more than he did over the last 2 weeks. And I think he fared fine the week before as well, too, against the 49ers.
It's just tough when he only threw 13 passes in the whole game.
I think you're more or less getting Taysom Hill quarterback version. Like if you were saying Taysom Hill played quarterback, that's kind of what Mariota's been doing, but that's okay from a fantasy perspective. Again, Daniel Jones is at the top. Did you want to just run through quickly the streamer QBs?
Yeah, so the 2 quarterback league options. Of course, we have to talk about Sam Ehlinger for the Colts. Matt Ryan. Somewhere along the line, I picture a scenario where he's sitting there, has his shoulder separated, and then someone walks up to him and says, "Oh, by the way, you're benched."
And not because you're hurt, because you suck.
Yes,
Ryan.
Pretty much making that very, very clear. So Ehlinger's around. I mean, he's got the Commanders this week. They're 20 against opposing quarterbacks. Patriots are 18. Raiders are 32. So it's a decent upcoming schedule. If you buy into the Pro Football Focus grades at all, he was one of the higher rated quarterbacks in the preseason. Obviously, this is a different ball game. He was a 6th round pick, so didn't necessarily come with a ton of pedigree, but he's a guy that suddenly comes into play that was probably available in even the deepest of 2 quarterback leagues. And then I hadn't paid a ton of attention to the Saints. I always just assumed Jameis would be back when he's healthy, but I guess he's not. He's got those back fractures, and Dalton's been playing okay.
I think they play Winston now. I think the 2 pick sixes on the Thursday night contest were a little bit too much. I bet you Winston's back as a starter this week.
Yeah, and it's a good upcoming schedule. The Raiders versus Baltimore at Pittsburgh. While there's some historically good defensive names in there, all 3 of those are bottom 5 defenses against opposing quarterbacks in fantasy.
So Ellinger, let's go back to that for a second, has been listed the starter for the remainder of the season, according to head coach Frank Reich.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe Ellinger will be the starting quarterback if everyone is healthy? If Matt Ryan comes back healthy, Ellinger stays healthy the entire year. Do you believe he is actually the starter the entire season?
Because
if he is, man. I mean, this is an important question. If he is, then in a 2 QB league, you're talking like 15-20% of your budget.
You're talking there. If you believe that, then you're talking the rest of your budget here, because you're not going to get too many starters rest of season at this point in time.
And one's situated in good offenses. Are you excited about PJ Walker as your starter for the Panthers rest of the season? No, because they have no McCaffrey, and I know that they won last week, but whatever. There's less weapons involved. Yeah. The Colts have Alec Pierce. We've talked about a number of times. Michael Pittman, we think, is really good. They have a number of good tight ends. Jonathan Taylor. Like, the list goes on what this offense could be. If you have the right QB, I am just not convinced at all. Like, I'll be putting not the mortgage down, but we're talking a substantial amount of money on Sam Ellinger not remaining the starting quarterback for the entire season. That just seems wrong to me. Well, Matt Ryan,
but it would have to be
bad, but not that bad.
It would have to be a trade or something, right? Because I remember at halftime last night, or in the second quarter of the Monday night game, it's like, oh, Mac Jones is the Colts. You think they'll do it? That'll be the one. But it'll have to be something like that to unseat him, because everything that I've read about that situation seems to suggest that, one, Matt Ryan's arm is shot, and two, they just don't really have any faith in him anymore.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Again, dealing with the you said separation, a sprained shoulder might as well be the same thing. It could be a couple of weeks before Matt Ryan comes back healthy and makes that a conversation. There's also Frank Reich's pet project and Nick Foles, who is looming in the background too, that if you really wanted to roll
that's
the dice,
right.
Mr.
I forgot
Frank,
about him.
Go ahead and consider Nick Foles. But from a hey, let's draft and actually make our guys look good development perspective, Sam Ellinger seems to be the right call for the Colts. All right, let's take a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. For the video audience, we'll be right back. Obviously, audio audience, stick around. It's time to victory lap after that too. So let's take a break here. All right, we're going to the running back position. Yep. This has been a huge.
I got to hand it to you.
We had talked about what happens in the odd event that Christian McCaffrey is traded. How did the Panthers' backfield work out? Well, the answer, at least for past week, both of them, which we covered, both Chuba Hubbard and Deonta Foreman. I had said, and I think you had said as well too, if you have roster spots at the end of your bench, churn them for these guys, because you never know when the situation is going to work out. Well, great. Lo and behold, you've walked into at least a running back 2 situation for both of them. I did that in every league I could. You also had Gus Edwards get activated off of injured reserve, immediately walks into a near 20-point game for the Ravens. And I know the Ravens have the Buccaneers this week. I'm going to try to sell high on Gus Edwards in the place I haven't, and it's a lot. You have no idea when J.K. Dobbins is coming back. Kenny Drake was non-existent in that one. And then I think Kyron Williams, the Rams were on bye this past week. He was the other one I talked about. Just stash him. It's literally free. I would not be surprised at all if Kyron Williams starts and plays at a running back 2 level this week, although the Rams have been kind of coy on that.
Yeah, everyone's been, or I guess with Kyron Williams, everyone was like, oh, those are such terrible combine numbers. That's the worst 40. But he seems to be doing some things right, at least. He was a candidate to play week 1 had he been healthy. I had seen some tweets about his pass blocking capabilities, so there's at least a little upside there. But let's start with the hot one. I mean, Baltimore, and if you had to pick a number 1 overall pickup, it's probably Gus Edwards, who is 43% rostered in Yahoo formats out of last week.
Can I pause you real second?
Yeah.
This is the blow your whole waiver budget or like FAAB budget kind of guy, right? Like that's if he's available, isn't
it? It's difficult because like you said, will J.K. Dobbins come back? And then the other thing with this is you're just looking through the snap share. The snap share tells a little bit of a different story than the fantasy points say, because Edwards was only on the field for 36.5% of snaps.
There you go. Okay.
Justice Hill was 31.7%. Kenyon Drake, while he was unproductive entirely, 25.4%. And it was really the red zone work for Gus Edwards that derived all of his fantasy value. He had a 7-yard and a 1-yard score. Now, if he's getting around 40% of the snaps and he's the goal line guy and J.K. Dobbins remains out, then yes, he's going to be a very startable option every week. And at this point, if you're hurting for running backs, I could see a blow the whole budget situation here, but it's not. It's not as great as like the Kenneth Walker thing or something from a couple weeks ago. He's there, but there's just like a little bit of a word of caution here. I picked him up. I'm keeping him around in a 10-team league. So, not that much. I have no desire to drop him, but he's also not starting over some of my other backs there. So, you do have to be prepared for a few weeks where he comes back down to earth, a few weeks where maybe Lamar Jackson gets some of those red zone scores instead of Gus Edwards, and a few weeks where, maybe Justice Hill will have a good game in there. It's certainly possible here. The snap share is just the biggest red flag for me with Gus.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that because I think they're going to gradually give him more as he continues to progress. And it's the same thing we saw with J.K. Dobbins. It was by 3 or 4 weeks later into the season, he was getting the carries. The reason I'm going to try to sell high on Gus Edwards is the strength of schedule that we have. So we have the Buccaneers. I think it's a Thursday night game. Buccaneers defense hasn't been what we've seen in the past years, but pretty good against the run. The Saints defense, same. They're about middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed. But when you think about ways in which they can get beat, it's through Chris Harris and the other bad corners that the Saints have, which, again, Lamar Jackson's going to be capable of to get Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, provided he's healthy. We'll talk about that. And DuVernay as well, too. So then you have a bye. I mean, you're talking about a 3-week stretch. If Dobbins is going to come back within 4 weeks, I don't believe that's the case, but if Dobbins is coming back within 4 weeks, you're talking around week 11 or 12 when they face the Panthers, Jaguars, and the Broncos. And then you have the fantasy playoffs where it's the Steelers, Browns, Falcons, Steelers again. That's at least 5 situations where you could say the running back for the Ravens, whoever's playing the best, is going to be a running back 2 for you. I think Dobbins comes back around that point and muddles things even further. I'm happy selling off a 2-touchdown performance when I literally walked into free money.
Yeah, the graph is gonna look like this. It's gonna go up. He's gonna get used a little more, and then it's gonna come down a bit and then be flat kind of the rest of the year at the point where Dobbins comes back. So, great pickup, probably one of the top ones this week, but I don't think it's someone that you can count on to save your fantasy season here. And neither is necessarily the Carolina backfield, who you hinted at that in the beginning. We have to go a little bit further in depth than that. Right now, or as of last night, Chuba Hubbard was 36% rostered. Deontay Foreman was 49% rostered in Yahoo leagues. So I think a lot of leagues where you allow pickups after the Thursday night game starts, I think that affected those numbers quite a bit, and you have to go for that. And now this is one where it's a little more complex than just looking at the stats on the surface will do for you. Now, Chuba Hubbard, 14.5 PPR points. Deontay Foreman, 16.5 PPR points. And when you look at the final snap share, it was 54-46 for Foreman, but that wasn't necessarily how it started out. While Foreman was on the field for more snaps, before Chuba Hubbard hurt his ankle, it was a 61% for Hubbard. He was leading the way. He was the guy before he got hurt. So what muddles this whole thing up is what's going to happen with Hubbard. Is he going to play? How much can we count on him for? So there is a chance where Deontay Foreman is the lead back, and he becomes one of your top targets for at least the short term. And then you also have to throw the name Raheem Blackshear out there.
Love this.
This is the sneaky cheap one where everyone's going to throw all their money on Foreman or even Hubbard. But say, for example, Hubbard gets ruled out on Friday, you can pick up Blackshear for nothing, and I think he is going to be the pass-catching back. If you look at his college stats, he was used that way frequently in college, and he'll kind of you don't think of Deontay Foreman as the pass-catching back. And remember, this is the Panthers. We alluded to them being the worst team in football. Obviously didn't look the case this week, but they're going to be behind more often than not in games. So I think there's a role for Blackshear here if Chuba Hubbard has to miss any kind of time. Now then you see the alternative side of that where the coach is like, oh, we could have brought him back in. We were just being careful. So I don't know. I think you have to wait for a little more information on this one. But those are 3 names that definitely are ones that you're checking on when you're doing FAAB this week.
I want to do like a totality rank with Gus Edwards, Chuba Hubbard, and Deontay Foreman in a second. But the Raheem Blackshear thing, I'm not sure you're giving yourself enough credit for that call, because I really agree with you. If you are the disciple of Mario Puig that I am, Jake, you would know that he loves Raheem Blackshear. And I think the important context for this is that he's incredibly fast and a really good athlete. And the fact that he didn't get an opportunity, I think he was on the practice squad or started with the Bills initially, was more so that the Bills were like weird roster construction. And then Blackshear was picked up by the Panthers post preseason. If I'm remembering this correctly, Blackshear is going to be a guy that, as in the same vein of what the Colts are doing right now with Sam Ehlinger. When you are a team that likely is not going to be competing, I know the NFC South is weird right now, and the Panthers are technically within things. If you are not competing, you're looking at the bottom half of your roster and seeing what you got. I think Blackshear is going to be talented enough that when he's given the opportunity, and he will be given the opportunity, he's going to make do with it from a fantasy perspective. So I'm not sure it's this week, but let's just say week 10, 11, 12, and the Panthers are 3-10. That's when I think Blackshear is going to be a fantasy guy. Yeah. And if you're in deeper leagues, all for it. I love that pickup call.
And I'll acknowledge it's a new regime, but this is an offense that's designed to throw tons of targets to the running back, and obviously McCaffrey's gone. Robbie Anderson's gone. How much longer is DJ Moore going to be around? What I'm saying is it's an offense that throws to the running backs, tons of targets available on a team that is, like I said, going to be behind more often than not. It all adds up to the pass catching back here. But if it ends up being a trio of Hubbard, Foreman, and Blackshear on this team, then it's a wasteland.
No, I agree. Well,
but you have to watch the injury scenario.
We play in that deep dynasty league. I think Blackshear's going to be a guy that if he's not already picked up, I'll be going heavily in. It's, again, 20 roster spaces and 14 teams. That's where I think Blackshear makes a lot of sense. He's 0% roster in Yahoo for a reason. The RotoWire Online Championships, despite the fact that I'm 1-6, I'm going to keep competing, right? And I'll pick up a guy like that, too, for one of my empty spots. I think that makes total sense. Okay, Chuba Hubbard, Deonta Foreman, Gus Edwards. This is a trio of running backs, at least that produced last week, to the point where people are going to think this is a really good waiver wire. I want you to A, either say, yes, it is a good waiver wire, B, no, actually it's not. And then I want you to rank these three, Jake, because I think this is an important context for the listeners.
Yeah, I'd still put Gus number one because I'm a lot more worried about the J.K. Dobbins injury and him missing time the rest of the season than Chuba. And I guess if we're doing rest of the season, I think I go Gus, Chuba, Foreman. If we're doing just this next week, it's Gus, Foreman, Chuba, or maybe Blackshear.
Okay.
So yeah, that's how I do that. But all right.
Yeah.
Are we good on that? We got a couple more running backs to hit.
I like Gus. I like Foreman and Chuba in that same ranking that you did too. All right. I told you this is victory lapping time. This is just strictly complimenting Joe time because I was so in on Tyler Algier over the Falcons running backs. You weren't as
You were definitely more in than me. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I'll give you that one here. And basically what I wrote on the outline was, guess we have to revisit Tyler Algier. He's dominating the backfield touches there, and he's even looking a little bit more effective than I originally gave him credit for. So I'll give you that one. 60% snap share. That was his season best this week compared to just 24.4% for Huntley. Now, we'll see what happens if or when that Atlanta backfield gets healthy. We'll see what happens when they decide they're going to throw more than 13 times in a game in which they're behind. But Algier at 40% roster needs a look.
Any other running backs that you're considering? You know my opinions on Kyron Williams, but is there anybody in that same tier?
Yeah, so there are a couple guys that are right around 50% roster that I was hesitant to bring up and feature heavily, but of course Isaiah Pacheco was the hot pickup this week. He got up to 50% rostered. Didn't quite go as planned though. He only got 8 carries, wasn't targeted a single time, despite 10 different Chiefs being targeted. And of course, it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire that scored the touchdown. So Pacheco is on the radar though, if they're confident enough in him to start him. And another, I mentioned, checking guys that were dropped during buys. A lot of people probably dropped Alexander Madison during the bye week because, you got to field your lineup and he's an RB2 anyway. You're holding him as a handcuff to Cook largely because there's not a ton of standalone value, maybe a little bit. But, if you're stashing and churning over your roster, you have to talk about, looking for Madison at least in case somebody dropped him because he can turn into, an RB2 with one Cook injury. So, and he's probably one of the higher ceiling or higher upside handcuffs if, in the whole league, really, at this point, as has been the story for the last couple of years. I originally wrote, well, maybe Ty Johnson's in play after Breece Hall got hurt, and were they really going to give Michael Carter all the carries? But then they went and acquired James Robinson and ruined all my Michael Carter shares. So that's that. And then, throwing stashes in there. I mean, Kyron Williams we talked about, maybe Zamir White, Jalen Warren, Marlon Mack's on a new team, Keontae Ingram a lot of people like. So a couple names to think about there. And I'll run down some cuts too, if that's okay, unless you have anything to add on those stashes. Well, obviously Tevin Coleman goes back to the bench. He came in,
back to the waiver wire.
Goes back to the waiver wire is what I mean. Yeah, he back to the wire here. If you had to cut Kenyon Drake, I know sometimes it's tough after you make a big FAAB bid. He could possibly be in cut territory. Mike Boone left with a knee injury, and he only had less than 12% snap share anyway. He can be cut. I mentioned cutting J.D. McKissick last week, but he fell even further in the pecking order this week. Now, again, they played from ahead for a lot of that game, so that affects it a little bit. But Gibson was the pass catcher, so I think you can cut bait with McKissick. And this is a spicy one, but what are we going to do with A.J. Dillon? Man, this is one where if it's a 10-team league, I could see you making a move there. He had a season low 27.7% snap share, only 4 carries, and they really made an effort to pound the ball with Aaron Jones, and that was some of the only effective offense that they had. The one kind of shovel, pitch play, that was the only play that worked, and the broadcast team noted it. But it's real tough. Obviously I'm keeping AJ Dillon in my 14 teamer because I'm not going to be able to find much better than that and just hope he turns it around. But in a 10-team league, he's one that you definitely think about when making these tough calls.
All those names that you mentioned, J.D. McKissic might be a surprise. I agree with you. Complete cut for me. In a 10-team league, A.J. Dillon is absolutely cut. 12-team, wouldn't even be that upset if you got a opportunity to get Algier or Gus Edwards or the Panthers running backs like that. That's just where we're at right now with the Panthers offense. Not so much, Packers offense.
Yeah, I could see dropping Dillon for like Gus in a 12-team league. I think I might make that move.
Yeah, I could
even as a Packers fan, which is a really hard pill to swallow. I guess I'd make that move.
Let's go ahead and talk about the wide receivers. Before we do so, let's get a word from our sponsor, Swagger. There are 50 million fantasy sports players and sports bettors in the U.S., but 90% of all the cash prizes are won by just 2% of the players. It's because most gaming options were created for pros. The dude's dropping loads of cash and data to find an edge over the rest of us, not Swagger. Swagger is a daily fantasy sports site created for sports fans who simply want some skin in the game and a real shot at winning. Tired of losing because of one bad pick? I know I am. With Swagger, you don't need to be a perfect to win. You just simply need to create a ticket of 4 to 10 player props and score points for the ones you get right. Your score determines your win, not the perfect ticket. You can be half right and all right with Swagger. Swagger offers the most player props and biggest payouts of any DFS site, as much as 50 times your money. Plus, you can play a fantasy football along with all the other major U.S. pro sports, as well as international soccer, Formula One, NASCAR, fight sports, rugby, cricket, and even esports. If you're ready to play, visit playwithswagger.com/RotoWire to sign up, and Swagger will give you $10 free to try them out. Plus, match your first deposit 100% up to $100. Swagger, daily fantasy sports for all fankind. Okay, at wide receiver, we had not quite as much of the victory lapping as we could have at running back, but still some interesting names. I think the biggest one, we're already getting questions about this, Jake, is Wan'Dale Robinson. So I want to jump right into this.
Yep.
Give us the breakdown on Wan'Dale Robinson, but where, more importantly, you rank him among the waiver wire topics and targets this week.
Yeah, he definitely has to be among the top because you've got upside alone. He's a young, high draft pick with talent and potential, and he's finally starting to see the volume here. After he only had 22.6% of the snap shared last week, he jumped up to 67.1% this week, which was second on the team to Marcus Johnson. I'm not quite sure the story on that, but he's only 29% rostered. He finished with a team high 8 targets, caught 6 of them for 50 yards. I think he absolutely is among the top options if you have to go out and get a receiver this week. The rest of these guys that I have on our list, I'm stretching to kind of make a case because of injury and whatnot. But I think
receiver, because this is another one that get questions. Paris Campbell, back-to-back weeks now of being a very successful PPR target, if nothing else. And with the change with Sam Ehlinger, I'm not sure if it benefits Campbell or not, but they've made a clear focus. You look at the snap share and also targets of the last 2 weeks to get Campbell more involved. And it might be one of those things where, better quarterback or not, you're going to go ahead and have this same scheme operate the way they are.
Yeah, we definitely have to touch on him because he's more widely available, only about 5%. I know Alec Pierce was the hot pickup for us for a while, but then Campbell goes out and catches 10 of his 12 targets for 70 in his score. I actually think he functions better with a quarterback like Ehlinger that they might do more short passes with. So that helps. And the other thing I like about him is, like you said, you mentioned snap share, but he just doesn't leave the field. His last 3 weeks, 93.2%, 100%, 98.4%. So he's out there a ton. That's the first step, is getting the opportunity. And we first saw the targets here this week. So I think he is, he's a good option, but I think you're going to have maybe.
Well, would you rather roster Alec Pierce or Paris Campbell, for example?
Oh man. I just feel like Campbell's going to be inconsistent. I don't know if we can expect double-digit targets each week. So I'm thinking I'd maybe take the Alec Pierce ceiling, but it's close. Campbell is absolutely somebody, like, you don't pick him up and think he's going to be like a season changer, but he's somebody that is absolutely startable when you get yourself in a pinch here with all these bye weeks coming up. He's someone in a PPR league that maybe you can count on for a decent floor.
Yeah, and the issue with Campbell for his career has been, can he stay healthy? So with the extra workload he's been getting, obviously 2 games in, he's looking fine. Is that something that can consistently happen? I don't know. Most of those injuries, I think all of them were just fluky things. So
and then like you said, we have the quarterback change too. So I'm not ready to go all in on Campbell and suddenly expect the double-digit targets to continue. He's absolutely worth a bid to kind of wait and see. Because he could be something, but it's not something that I'm not sure I'd call him the top overall receiver pickup this week. And I don't know. I'm liking Wan'Dale Robinson just because of how Daniel Jones is playing, and there's more ceiling and unknown. Like he could turn out to be something very effective for fantasy.
So, and honestly, the Giants are playing really well, and the Colts aren't. It could just be as simple as that when you're talking about you want offensive players. I mean,
absolutely.
And we talked about Daniel Jones as the top streaming quarterback. So I agree with you. I think Wan'Dale ranks ahead of Paris Campbell for me. What about Wan'Dale over Gus Edwards and the Panthers running backs, though?
No, I think almost all those top 3 backs that we have go. Like if you need a flex, I'd rather flex Gus Edwards. I'd rather flex Deontay Foreman because it's a little safer for me. But we could see what happens. Wan'Dale could easily outperform them too.
Okay, that's why I want to be at least be clear on. Okay, so it's been give positive praise to Joe time. Well, now it's time to dunk on Joe's Stake League team. We had Kyle Pitts stinking. We had Jonathan Taylor get hurt, and we now add DK Metcalf to the mix.
Yeah.
That is 75% of my budget. If you are counting along, I am pissed. So DK Metcalf theoretically doesn't need surgery. Also currently listed as day-to-day because the Seahawks are stupid. He got carted off. There's a patellar injury.
It's a patellar.
He's likely not going to be playing for multiple weeks. We're just doing this dumb thing that we've done across the NFL. So we did this Mac Jones. We did the Damon Harris. Now we're going to add DK Metcalf to the mix. I am concerned, obviously, but who are we looking at instead of DK Metcalf if he's out multiple weeks?
Yeah, I will just say that Metcalf is an absolute physical freak, and maybe his body is like Giannis or Adrian Peterson and can just magically recover. But I'm not going to count on that happening here. And the guy that gets the biggest step up is Marquise Goodwin. He was always, so Tyler Lockett probably gets the biggest step up, but it's in terms of waiver wire, how you can actually benefit. I'm definitely looking at Marquise Goodwin over a guy like D. Eskridge. Eskridge also sees an increased snap share, but he fumbled pretty badly last week, and that probably won't go over so well. But Marquise Goodwin, he's always been an interesting guy. If you remember back to Buffalo and San Francisco, a guy to take the top off the defense. Now, he's 31 years old, so the biggest question is how much of that 4.27 combine speed is still left. But he looked great, and he was productive on Sunday. Caught 4 of his 5 targets for 67 yards and 2 scores. I think teams will game plan a little bit better for him to be featured now. But his increased volume and, again, the consistently passable play of Geno Smith definitely makes Goodwin a candidate.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the 4.27 speed. That was a decade ago. I don't know, Jake. We're not quite as much of athletes as Marquise Goodwin was, who literally competed in the 4x100, I think, Olympic trials, right?
He could run 240s before I finished mine.
I'm just saying, then. I have lost a bit of my 40 time in a decade, but again, I'm not an NFL player. You need somebody. I mean, the Seahawks offense has been good. And it's not just Kenneth Walker. There's been the Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. There's going to be a second receiver because this offense can support that. I don't know if it is Goodwin. I'm not sure if it's D. Eskridge either. Somebody is going to emerge. And honestly, with the way the Seahawks have been competing in the NFC West, I wonder if they're a candidate to trade for a guy, right? That's
interesting.
They have draft capital post Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Kind of surprising a lot of people.
I feel like they won't turn around. I mean, it's an organization set on a rebuild, right? I feel like they wouldn't cut that short immediately, but
I don't know, man. Like they never talked rebuild. We as the media and everyone else did because they supposedly were going to stink. Claypool is a similar type of athlete, and the Seahawks will be more willing to dive in, and the Packers certainly will.
Yeah.
I could just see it. I'm like,
this is a team that could Seahawks actually have the capital to make that work. The Packers,
a 5th round pick,
not
Packers
necessarily.
They're just dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I don't know if it's Marquise Goodwin. That's an interesting name, though, so long as DK Metcalf is out. Anybody else that you really like in on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at some of the Jets guys again. Garrett Wilson, 49%. Elijah Moore, 42%. Moore's probably going to be back this week. I don't love the situation here, but Corey Davis is day-to-day with a knee injury status up in the air. Nobody should have been surprised that Davis was getting a lot of the looks in production given his contract, but if he doesn't play, somebody's going to get some of that volume. So you flag some of those guys, maybe even put alerts on for Corey Davis and think about picking up one of those wide receivers later in the week, though you don't necessarily need a bid there. I'm not really sold on Mecole Hardman. He has his last 3 weeks, 12, 13.2, and 28 PPR points. Chiefs are also on a bye. They do get Tennessee, which has been great, a great matchup for wide receivers, followed by Jacksonville, Chargers, and Rams. So it's a nice upcoming schedule after the bye. But I think the touchdowns that he scored this past week were a little bit fluky. I don't know if we'll see that production continue there. I have a deep cut, and I think it's time to revive Terrace Marshall. That's one that I wanted to talk about because he's only 1% rostered, so he's definitely out there. He didn't turn a ton of heads with 3 targets, catching 2 of them for 31 yards. But after the Robbie Anderson trade, Marshall saw a season-high 86% of snaps, basically going from inactive early to on the field a significant amount of times. And he played more than Shi Smith, who only saw 50%. That was the first time all year that this happened. So, as a wide receiver 2 under PJ Walker, all that great, but we kind of expect DJ Moore to get traded too. The Panthers are pretty much throwing the towel in on this season. So what happens when DJ Moore gets traded? Somebody's going to get the volume. And even if it's not efficient, he's someone that we definitely want to think about there. So those are some guys that I'm possibly in on, possibly making bids on. One more, just quick hitters. Jahan Dotson might be back soon. He looked good early. Sammy Watkins for the Packers is going to get the volume by default if Lazard misses time. Donovan Peoples-Jones for the Browns. He's been, moderately useful, but there's a lot more targets to go around after the Njoku injury. And then obviously Tyler Boyd had the huge game for the Bengals. But I don't know. He's still wide receiver 3 there. I think Higgins is going to have
those big Mageddon cuts that I've seen like across 12-team and 10-team leagues. Tyler Boyd was the one I saw pretty frequently.
I just did like 8 names really fast.
I was going to say, did we ignore the Chargers thing with Mike Williams?
Oh, geez. Okay, yeah. So I did skip over that. You're right, because I want to tee this up for you. So Mike Williams, he's out a TBD amount of time with an ankle injury. Looks like a high ankle sprain. Keenan Allen's back here, but like. He doesn't do the same things as Mike Williams. I want to ask, my gut is that the tight ends are going to get some of that production like you discussed last week. Am I right in that?
Yeah. So Chargers on a bye week this week. So that's an important context. And for however long Mike Williams is out, I think you'll see the offense just overall struggle because you needed him to be able to be a downfield stretcher and be able to be consistently doing it. So DeAndre Carter, I think, takes some outside stuff. Joshua Palmer might end up playing those opportunities and those snaps, but
he was banged up though too, right?
He had the concussion, and I think he'll be back after the bye week. But 2 weeks ago, it was the pass rush of the Broncos dominating the game, so they checked down to Palmer and Gerald Everett the whole time. I'm not sure anything changes from that perspective for the Chargers moving forward, but if they need someone to stretch the field, it's DeAndre Carter playing. Donald Parham was somebody I mentioned in the deep sleeper section of tight ends. I think Donald Parham might be their best deep threat. The issue was he got hurt immediately I don't think he played this week, or if he was, injured entering. So like they're toast. I mean, I don't. Maybe the Chargers make a trade for Claypool, somebody, Elijah Moore. I'm not positive. But this is a team that desperately needs a deep threat and could also just use a third receiver. Period. Even if Mike Williams were playing, you could say that was the case anyhow. I'm not sure there's an actionable move with Williams out for an extended period of time, other than it stinks for people who are investing in Mike Williams. He was kind of a guaranteed wide receiver 2, even though he's inconsistent, and I don't even have that.
If I need a desperate flex on Sunday morning and Palmer, who's only around 20% rostered, is there? Well, obviously not this Sunday morning. It'll be even less after this week. But you know what I'm saying? I think he could be productive a little bit. I think he sees some of that volume. DeAndre Carter, 94.2% of the snaps this past week. So that's interesting.
I kind of like the cut mention that you have here, so I'm going to let you go ahead and run with this because I think I agree with you. I at least considered it in one league. Yeah,
I try to get a little spicy with these. Every show wants to, like, I think I say this once a week almost, but every show wants to give you a list of 30 pickups here, but guess what? You can't pick all those guys up without cutting someone. So the name that I put on here to purposefully be a little hot here is Drake London, because he only had one target this week and the team only threw the ball 13 times. That's frustrating. Am I actually going to cut him, in a 12 or a 14? Probably not, but he has one or two more weeks with this type of volume, then suddenly we're having that conversation. So, that's one name out there. And then I know like a lot of people were picking up Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith last week. I feel like those guys obviously trend downward as the Saints receiving core gets healthier here.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think in 10-team leagues, Drake London, with the way the Falcons have been playing, is a cut. And I think in 12-team teams, you're kind of considering the same type of deal too. So interesting.
Most shows are too chicken to do the cut part, because I can guarantee there's a possibility where someone could clip together our audio saying to cut Drake London and AJ Dillon, and that could easily come back to burn us. But things stand right now, you have to consider it.
I will gladly sell my career for A.J. Dillon and the Packers actually looking like they're supposed to, because this has been a frustrating last 3 weeks. And if you need to clip things to get A.J. Dillon to actually play well, sign me up.
We'll take it.
Yeah, it wasn't even just the playing time this week, which was bad. It was, I think, last week against the Jets, dropping things and fumbling. He just does not look like the kind of player they thought he'd be. All right. Besides the running backs and besides Wan'Dale Robinson, Jake, the most questions we've got so far has been on Greg Dulcich, tight end for the Broncos. I'm excited to hear your opinion after the break here, after our sponsor here from MKF. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action you're looking for. And if college football is more of your speed, they've got plenty of that too. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit match instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. We had talked about Greg Dulcich last week as a pickup. So it's been the Gus Edwards, Greg Dulcich, the Panthers running backs. We really covered a lot of things. But if you weren't listening or didn't have the roster spaces to do so, I think Greg Dulcich actually immediately emerges as a kind of guy that you need to have this week. Travis Kelce on bye, Gerald Everett on bye, basically 2 fantasy starters for most people. And Dulcich has played well, 9 targets this week. Where are you ranking Greg Dulcich among the low-end tight end ones this season and from an availability perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could easily finish in the top 12 if he has this type of volume, which has some utility in fantasy. I mean, the 9 targets, he was targeted as many times as Cortland Sutton. So, what does that tell you? And he was out there for a season-high 60% snap share, which was, a notable increase from what he had, last week in prime time here. So he's absolutely a name that you consider streaming, that I will have at least a couple bids in my Kelsey leagues, which are heavy. So he's a guy that you definitely have to look at. I also kind of like, Harrison Bryant of the Browns, out there everywhere. David Njoku is expected to miss 2 to 5 weeks with a high ankle sprain. That's pain, because David Njoku is a guy that I picked up in a few leagues where I didn't get Kelsey and has been, a pretty steady 8 to 12 point guy in what's otherwise a tight end wasteland. So we're going to miss him. I think the Browns will. I had mentioned giving some of those targets to Peoples-Jones, but I think Harrison Bryant might be involved there a little bit. Got to talk about the Bucs. Of course, the offense is rough. Cameron Brate has that neck injury and was already listed as a DNP on Monday's practice estimate. We have Mike Evans banged up again. So Cade Otton is coming off a week in which he caught 4 of 5 passes for 64 yards. That's significant in tight ends. I mean, there's going to be some deep leagues where, obviously if you have Kelsey, there's no need to roster another tight end. So, you're going to have to go to some of these 0% rostered guys. So, I'm saying them in the order that I like. I don't know if I might push Otton above Harrison Bryant, but Dulcich, Otton, Harrison Bryant, and then I wrote down, I'm probably not even going to say this name right, but Chris Myarick for the, good enough for the Giants. I guess he's top of the depth chart now after Daniel Bellinger, a guy that we've talked about in the past, fractured his eye socket and will miss time. That was a late ad. I snuck that. I always look over Payne's waiver wire column here.
Hold on. You know that we are a show that prioritizes relevant TV conversation. How has Daniel Bellinger, with this fractured eye socket, not just went House of Dragons, slapped an eye patch on and started to play? This seems like the perfect time for somebody in the NFL to rock an eye patch. It's not like they're going to be really using the tight end position all that much anyway. Bellinger has to just catch a pass in the end zone. That's all it is. Eye patch. Put it on.
If you get poked in the eye and your eyeball gets hurt, then eye patch. Go for it. If your orbital bone gets freaking fractured, a helmet's not going to.
You have a helmet. Make a bigger helmet to cover the eye. This is an eye patch relevant situation, and I think House of Dragons.
I completely disagree. Man. And that's the MMA. That's the MMA in me. When someone breaks their orbital, the Athletic Commission for that's sanctioning the MMA event suspends you 6 months. Like you can't. Oh wow. You're not even. Yeah.
So is Daniel Bellinger done for the season? Then is that what you're saying?
So our most recent note from yesterday needs surgery out indefinitely.
Oh. Okay.
And I don't know if there are tight ends on the trade market, but you're looking at Myarick and Tanner Hudson here. So, by default, with a receiving core that's already, banged up as is here, maybe there's a guy there if this Myarick guy can step in and do the Bellinger
when Ricky
thing.
Seals-Jones was supposed to be the starting tight end for the Giants. I don't even think he made the training camp roster or active roster beginning week 1. Okay, so we had talked about the Greg Dulcich. Just a few questions, and we're doing great on time, so I just wanted to ask you.
Yeah, sure. Let's get some questions.
So, do you prefer Greg Dulcich or Hayden Hurst or Evan Ingram rest of season? I kind of thought like they're the same type of player.
Yeah.
Dulcich, Hayden Hurst, or Ingram?
Well, I'm going Hurst, and it was easy because I already made this claim in my Kelsey league again, and all those guys were out there, and I pick Hurst because Joe Burrow looks like he's starting to heat up, and Hurst is consistently involved.
I have Dulcich as my tight end too, and a number of leagues, and I got them mainly last week. I, again, believe Dulcich is the second best tight end on that roster. I think Alberto Quagbanoon is, but as long as Nathaniel Hackett, the Hack, is still going to be the coach for the Broncos, this is going to be the same situation. And Dulcich is not a bad player by any means. Like he's proven to be effective.
Basically, I put $1 bid on Hurst in what's a 10-team league, and if someone else scoops Hurst up, then I'll probably grab Dulcich for nothing and start him 1 week. But that particular league is a 10-teamer, and he'll be cut after that.
I love that.
Kelsey.
Millie Mills in the comments section actually let us know this is a perfect example of what you're talking about. They had to drop Rachaad White last week because of the waiver wire buy him again situation. That's going to be their top waiver wire pickup this week. PSA to everyone. Check who was dropped from buy him again this past week, because I think more than likely one or two of those players might be your top waiver wire pickup and just might not qualify for the show because we try to target players under 50%.
Well, and Rachaad White's actually 29%. We could have talked about him a little bit. I mean, if the Bucs are going to play from behind, he's going to be effective, and he probably sees a little bit more work after the bye. So Rachaad White probably should have fit into that running back mix a little bit.
Fournette getting injured too. I mean, there's always that possibility that you could have that happen. Real quick, let's just touch on the streaming defenses. It's a little bit trickier depending on who was cut, right? Again, same thing. Like Tyler Bass might have been cut.
If someone cut Buffalo or Philly, in the leagues where I had them, I actually did the thing where I hold 2 defenses for 1 week.
I finally converted you.
Because, Buffalo's the number 1 defense in all of fantasy, so it's not like you're just cutting them. If someone cut them, I'd actually put a bid on them because I don't think you're going to see a better fantasy defense show up the rest of the year, and their buys in the past. So guess what? You don't have to worry about that. So you look at those guys first, and then, it's not like Chiefs and Chargers were huge fantasy defenses, so you're probably sticking to who you got. And there weren't really a ton of standout streams this week. I wrote down 2 of them, and then I later checked, Jerry had one of them and Payne had one of them in their streaming defenses and bye week columns respectively. And one of them is the Colts. They've been excellent. They're only 35% roster. They've been excellent. I should qualify that. Their defense has been excellent. Offensively, not so much, but the Colts are readily available. They are the home team, and they get Taylor Heineke and the Washington Commanders. But like I said, Heineke,
I agree with you.
Heineke got into some rhythm here. And I'm not sure that that's the layup that, you might consider it on paper. You might even consider the other side and picking up the Commanders against Ellinger.
I agree. And it's funny, you have that same scenario with the Broncos and Jaguars as well, too, right?
Yeah, exactly here. So the Jags are 27% rostered, and they get Denver at home. And I don't have the latest on Russell Wilson, but we'll see if he suits up this week. That's one that you'll have to find out. And, maybe grab the Jags later on. Russell Wilson is trending towards a week 8 return, but again, it's not like he's looked that great anyway. Yeah. So whether it's Russ or the backup, the Jags are in play here, but it's kind of a desperate thing for me to go to Indy or Jacksonville. Chances are you're going to the defense that you've been rolling with so far.
All right, we have 2 user questions, then we're done, Jake. So
all right, let's hear them.
Starter sits. Start Olave or Jalen Waddle. This person just wants to flex on all of us that they have both those guys available. Waddle obviously was started last week, didn't do great. Olave was excellent in that Thursday night contest. I think both are playing teams, because I had the same conversation earlier with a coworker. I think both are playing teams in the bottom third in terms of passing, but Olave or Waddle this week?
That's one that's almost impossible to answer on Tuesday because Michael Thomas dealing with his foot injury, questionable. Jarvis Landry, questionable. If you get another week where both Thomas and Landry end up being ruled out, then it's Olave for sure, because I think you can bank on 15 targets for him. If everybody comes back, then I might lean towards Waddle. If one of the two comes back, it might be a true coin toss. But I guess, gun to my head, if he had asked me right now, I guess I'd say Olave, because the volume it's been there. It's been good.
And the final question, this is from Fantasy Football Excellence, and I saved it at the end because I actually was curious your opinion. Mm-hmm. Should this person trade Michael Pittman and Deontay Johnson, and they'll get back Kenneth Walker? He's concerned about Matt Ryan being benched and what that'll do for Michael Pittman.
Oh, boy. I mean, can they survive wide receiver-wise? Why else? Because Pittman and Deontay Johnson were probably your 3rd and 4th round picks, or 4th and 5th round picks, depending on the depth of the league. So what else do you got wide receiver-wise? I mean, those guys still provide volume, but
you know what I think about Deontay Johnson. I guess I'll say that.
Yeah. I know I drew the line at Pittman last week, but that was obviously before the 6th round pick is going to take the job over. So, yes, I would obviously trade Pittman for Walker, but now you're right. You're going to need both. You know what? I guess I'd take Walker. I think he might be a league-winning move.
I think I do.
It took me a lot to commit to that.
I know you're always in on Pittman. Like that's your guy, and he's been fine. I wonder if the Sam Elder. I agree with you. I think I make that trade, which is crazy. 3 weeks ago, we never would have said that. You would have been laughed at the door if that was a conversation. And I was still low on Deontay Johnson, but now 3 weeks now, I agree.
Yeah, you can find 2 10, 12-point receivers on the wire. You can't find a 20-point a week RB1 on the wire. Right. So.
Yeah, and I think that's like not a floor necessarily, but that's more or less what he's getting guaranteed every week. I completely agree.
It's the Kenneth Walker show from here on out.
Unless you can get Austin Eckler, who I think is going to be the lone beneficiary of Mike Williams out for an extended period of time, there might not be a better running back fantasy perspective than Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if it's a league where you only start 2 wide receivers, I think I'd say definitely make that move. Or if it's a league where you maybe hit on some of your later wide receiver picks. But if it's a 14-teamer and you're searching the wire and you're going to start, Wan'Dale Robinson and Rondale Moore as your wide receivers 2 and 3, then that's one where you kind of got to do the math and see rest of season where it helps. So if you have any more context or follow up, hit us up on Twitter.
Yeah, JB Fantasy Sports or at RotoJake. That does for us in the RotoWire Fantasy Bowl podcast. Thanks for listening. Obviously, this is presented by No House Advantage. Best of luck to your fantasy lineups.